Coming up, the NBA draft lottery passes and luck was not on the Brooklyn Nets side. I react to the lottery results and what it can mean for the Nets moving forward after this. What is up, Nets world? We're back here on the Believe in Nets podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Eric Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. And before we get into anything, if you do not already, go to my YouTube channel at Eric Slater NBA. Subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the content, like it, comment. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. But I'm in Chicago right now because tonight was the night of the 2025 NBA Draft Lottery, a night that Brooklyn Nets fans have been anticipating and looking forward towards for the last year since the Nets pulled off those trades with the Houston Rockets and the New York Knicks last summer, reacquiring their first-round pick this year and next, also sending Mikal Bridges to the Knicks and setting themselves up to tank, and for the first time in nearly 15 years, nearly 2 decades, having a chance at a top selection in the draft and a homegrown superstar type talent. Obviously, Cooper Flagg at the top. The Nets finished with the 6th best lottery odds, obviously. That was lower than a lot of people anticipated. Despite that, though, I sensed a lot of optimism amongst the Nets fan base entering the night. You look at the odds; they had a 37% chance of jumping into the top 4, 9% chance of the number 1 pick, and the most likely landing spots were 6 through 8. Despite that, there was a sense of optimism amongst the Nets fan base. You know, if a team was ever due for some luck, it was this Nets organization that throughout the franchise's history has not had much luck, certainly not since the move to Brooklyn. And what happens? They fall to 8th. Obviously, it couldn't go any other way than the Nets to fall in this draft. The pipe dreams of them moving up wasn't going to happen. If the pick was owned by somebody else, like the Rockets or the Celtics or whoever, then it moves up. If it's owned by the Nets, not going to move up. So the Nets fall to the 8th pick in the draft, which is obviously a very disheartening outcome based on what the expectations were, because when the Nets made that trade with the Rockets and the Knicks, and they really, set themselves in this direction, the expectation immediately was that they were going to have one of the worst records in the league and that they were going to have a chance at a top 3 pick, and they finished 6th. And honestly, the way that this draft lottery played out, it doesn't even matter, it seems. I mean, it does always matter because the numbers are in your favor, but the teams that had the worst record in the league, they're picking ahead of the Nets, but they still fell back. The way this played out, it makes it sting even more that the Nets fell to 8, because you look at the teams that jumped into the top 4, and it's the Dallas Mavericks spike the number 1 pick and land Cooper Flagg, a team that had a 1.8% chance of getting the number 1 pick, a team that is coming off just a dumbfounding trade where they got universally crushed, and then Kyrie Irving tears his ACL. It looks like Nico Harrison's job is just unsalvageable. It looks like they're totally cooked. It's an abject disaster. What happens? They get rewarded with Cooper Flagg. Other teams, San Antonio Spurs land the number 2 pick, a team that is well run. But could you have any more lottery luck than the San Antonio Spurs have had? We're talking about David Robinson. We're talking about Tim Duncan. We're talking about Victor Wembanyama. And of course, now they move up to number 2. They're in position to select Dylan Harper. We'll see. They could trade the pick. I'll get more into that later. But they get rewarded again. Number 3, the Philadelphia 76ers, a team that entered the year with championship expectations. They obviously are ravaged by injury, but they just play like a team without a soul for the entire season. And the second half of the year just shamelessly tank and just shut everybody down. And it's really just a gross display to put themselves in position, put themselves ahead of the Nets. They land the number 3 picks. They're going to be in position to get an impact player. And then number 4 is the Charlotte Hornets. And beyond that, don't even need to get into it, but the Nets are 8th. And it stings that the Nets fell to 8th, but I think the fact that those teams moved up and those teams got rewarded at the top of the draft makes it hurt even more for Nets fans. And it makes, it seems like a lot of the NBA world is just kind of dumbfounded by how this played out. I mean, I was in the lottery room, not the drawing room, but I was in the room when they were giving the results out on the stage and all that. And there was just a sense of disbelief. I mean, when the Spurs, the 76ers, and the Mavericks jumped into the top 4 already, it was like, wow. You look at the teams that were at the top, the Utah Jazz, they fall. The Washington Wizards, they fall. All these teams are falling out. And then you get those teams at the top who you really, don't deserve to be there. And then obviously the Dallas Mavericks landing the number 1 pick and getting Cooper Flagg is just like the icing on the cake to what was a really tough night for a lot of teams, but especially for the Nets. And, I'm not going to go too long on this podcast. It's late. I got up really early this morning. I've been working all day, but just want to talk about where the Nets potentially go from here because it's difficult. It's not going to excite a lot of fans because when we were talking about going into this offseason for the Nets, it seemed like there were really two paths that they were going to be going on. It was either build through the draft, potentially getting, a top 6 pick, a 1 through 4 pick, hopefully, and landing a potential superstar level talent, potentially even Cooper Flagg, who was a transformational type of player for your franchise. It was that route, the build through the draft route, or the other route that everybody has been talking about has been cashing in the chips and trading for Giannis Antetokounmpo. And that actually gains some more momentum, not just from the Nets perspective, but from anybody who might be interessed's perspective, because Shams Charania put out a report earlier this morning that Giannis is open to questioning, I guess, whether Milwaukee is his best situation, open to investigating other options. And based on everything, I've written several articles about this since they got bounced in the first round, since Damian Lillard tore his Achilles, their lack of flexibility. That Dame Achilles injury really just, to me, that he's going to get traded. If he doesn't get traded, it's malpractice by the Bucks. It doesn't make any sense for him to stay there. I think he's going to get traded. So those are the two paths. You had the build through the draft path, you had the Giannis path. And if you're looking at it now, the Nets strike out on plan A in terms of landing that, Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper guy who you think can really be a face of the franchise, transformational guy. They can still get a player at 8 who's really good. I'll touch briefly on some of what the potential options could be. They could still get a great player at 8. There's superstars, there are MVPs who get picked all over the draft. It's just less likely that you're going to get a player like that. So they strike out from that perspective, most likely. And then the other path, the Giannis path, I think that these lottery results make it much less likely that a Giannis trade is going to come to fruition. Because if you look at the teams at the top of the draft, I said Dallas Mavericks land the number 1 pick in Cooper Flagg. I think a lot of people, right away would think it's lunacy for them to trade Cooper Flagg. But look at Nico Harrison. Look at what this guy has done in the last, 4 or 5 months. And if we're talking about a team that Nico Harrison has made it very clear that they're in win now mode around Anthony Davis. Obviously, Kyrie Irving is a torn ACL. They'll hope he'll come back from that. I definitely don't think that it's out of the question that they could look to trade Cooper Flagg for Giannis Antetokounmpo. The San Antonio Spurs, the number 2 team, I think are the even more likely team that makes more sense, because if I were the Mavericks, I would not trade Cooper Flagg. I think when you have that level of prospect for a decade plus, you can have him. I think you definitely hold on to him. Trading Luka and then trading Cooper Flagg would be unprecedented and historic, just giving up guys who could potentially carry your team for a decade plus. So I don't see that as much. It's a possibility, though. It's another team that could beat the Nets offer if they, want to. And then you look at the Spurs. I think the Spurs are the team. Like if Giannis is open to playing for San Antonio now at this point, I think that that's the team, because you look at what they have. Obviously, they traded for De'Aaron Fox to pair him alongside Victor Wembanyama. They're now at number 2, where the consensus pick is Dylan Harper. And De'Aaron Fox, not necessarily a great fit there. So you have Harper, you have Stephen Castle. Those are 2 blue chip young players. You have some other pieces. You have picks. If that's a place that Giannis wants to go, they could easily give the Bucks some picks. They can give them a blue chip type prospect to start a rebuild around, and Giannis can go to a team where he can pair with Victor Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox and really put himself back into the title conversation. Obviously, the West is extremely tough, but that's a team where you could have a 3-4 year runway along what could be, the best player in the NBA in coming years, and just an athletic pairing with those two, unlike anything we've ever seen before. So I think that the Spurs are in position there. I think that they'll definitely investigate it. Will they do it? Who knows? But that's another team that I think could beat the Nets offer, which obviously would be heavily pick oriented. And even if the Nets want to go after Giannis and want to put on this full court press for him, those are just teams that can drive up the bidding. It's going to be more difficult. That's not even mentioning teams like the Houston Rockets, teams like the Oklahoma City Thunder. We have to see what happens with that. But the bottom line, what I'm trying to get at here is obviously that face of the franchise, franchise altering type player that the Nets were hoping to get through the draft. They could still get it at 8. I just think it's less likely, obviously. And that Giannis route, that seems less likely now. So what are you looking at with the Nets next year, and what's the most likely path, in my opinion? it's going to be a slower build. It's going to be a little bit more patient. It's not going to be as exciting. And if you're looking, at the most likely outcome, you're probably looking at another year of tanking, and you're looking at a year of using their cap space that they have most likely. Could they swing for a free agent or two if they like a guy and they like the value? Yeah, but I think you're probably looking at absorbing bad contracts into that cap space, accumulating more picks, playing some of these young guys next year, tanking again, which honestly might not be that bad, because that's probably, it's a smart route for them. And it is like the route that a lot of fans probably wanted them to go, as opposed to cashing everything into Giannis. But I think fans were also hopeful that they would get a top 3 pick in this draft and potentially have that guy there to build around. And, it's obviously percentages. It's a lottery. Like, I want to talk a little bit about the lottery format and how this all played out today. But the idea of tanking next season and tanking again, it's still percentages, and you got to just play the math. But after this outcome today, it's just a reminder that nothing's guaranteed. I mean, you could tank again next season. Look at the Wizards. The Wizards fell to 6th. The Jazz fell to 5th in this draft. The Hornets get 4th. All the teams that were the worst record in the league fell in this draft, and 3 teams who had infinitesimal, percentage chances moved up. So you still play the percentages, but the NBA went to this new lottery format and the flattening of the odds to, dissuade tanking. And they haven't really done that. But I guess you could say that maybe this could moving forward, because teams are starting to move up. Like last year, we had the Atlanta Hawks move up from what was the Nets. We had the Atlanta Hawks move up to 1. We had the Houston Rockets from what was the Nets pick move up to 3. So, teams are moving up, and teams that were supposed to be at the top of the draft are moving back. And if you look at the parity of the league, it's kind of tough, and it brings in an interesting conversation. Like, I was listening to people talk about it at the lottery after it happened, and it is kind of a difficult conversation, because if you look at how these teams, these small market teams, need to build sometimes, a lot of the time it's through the draft. Like, that's the way to get better. Not even a small market team, just a team that's not good, like building through the draft, tanking, trying to get that top tier guy. That was the way for a lot of these teams to do it, who weren't going to be on, stars trade lists and preferred destinations. They weren't going to get those guys in free agency. When you look in this new CABA, how teams are going to be built, it's really tough. If these flattening lottery odds are resulting in teams that, kind of like the rich getting richer. I mean, if you look at this draft, the Dallas Mavericks, obviously, they have Anthony Davis. They have Kyrie Irving. They were set up to be a win now team. They spiked the number 1 pick. You look at the Philadelphia 76ers, obviously they tanked, but they get up into the top 4. You look at the San Antonio Spurs, a team that just got Victor Wembanyama, a team that has De'Aaron Fox, a team that has Stephon Castle. They're set up. They jumped to number 2, and all these teams that were worse, the Wizards, the Hornets, all these teams, the Nets, they moved back. So, I don't think, it's good for dissuading tanking, but if you're looking at just leveling the playing field and, allowing these teams to get better who are not as good, obviously, it's tough from that perspective. It could create more of a gap in some respects. So that's a tough reality of the lottery system. And if we're talking about the Nets tanking again next year, there's no guarantee whatsoever that they get a number 3 pick. They can give themselves the best chance. I mean, if the Nets were to have the worst record in the league this year, they'd have the 5th pick instead of the 8th pick. So obviously, the further you get up those lottery stand or the tankathon standings, the more it's going to improve your pick. But there's no guarantee that you get a number 1 pick. It is a lottery. There's more parity than ever before, and I think that this really just underscored that. And looking at where the Nets are going forward, there's a lot more questions than answers. They're in a position now where they're going to have a lot of draft picks. They're not in like a bad team building situation. They have the 8th pick. They have 19, 26, 27, 36. They have over $50 million in cap space. They can add more, to that, that treasure trove of draft assets by taking on some bad contracts and doing things along those lines. Are they completely out of the Giannis sweepstakes? No, like they could try to go after him. They could try to give a Godfather offer, but I just think there's other teams that have more to offer in terms of, concrete young players, blue chip prospects. The Nets would be more of a pick package, and the Bucks don't have control of their pick until 2031. So they're going to want some young players unless the Nets are somehow able to work out something with the Pelicans as a 3rd team where they get the Bucks pick from the Pelicans in a 3-team deal and they work it out that way. And the Bucks can then go into a tank, but I just don't see it. And, it's actually, I wouldn't say it's unfortunate, but it's interesting because the Knicks just beat the Celtics to go up 3-1, which is it's a rough night for Nets fans. I mean, Knicks beating the Celtics to go up 3-1. The Nets fall to 8. A Giannis trade's looking less likely. There's not a lot of, good things happening for the Nets right now. And in that Knicks Celtics game, Jason Tatum appeared to have suffered a torn Achilles, which is just awful and gut wrenching for him. But if you're looking at how that's going to impact the NBA and potentially the Eastern Conference, you're looking at next year. Now you have a Celtics team that is going to be out of it if Jason Tatum has a torn Achilles. It's already pretty open. I mean, we're talking about, the Cavaliers, the Pacers, the Pacers, the Knicks. Like, those are the three teams atop the Eastern Conference. Obviously very good teams, but it's more open than you would have thought before. So from that perspective, you could say and make the argument that, a trade for Giannis makes more sense than it did before. But I just think with the way these lottery results shook out, that if the Nets are going to trade for him, they're going to really have to outbid some of these teams and give up a lot, where then they'd have less left over to build around him. And I don't know if that's the smartest route. So, they're in a position where it's going to be a slower build. It seems like I don't see who the star guy that they're going to go after, who's going to completely transform their team outside of Giannis is. Like, I talked to Sean Marks at his exit interview. He said, if you're going after max level talent, it has to be a guy that completely transforms the trajectory of your franchise. Giannis obviously is that guy. It's why it's been reported forever by Brian Lewis, by other people, that he is the Nets' plan A target. Maybe I'm overstating how much these lottery results will impact their ability to get him. I just think, if he's open to playing for a team like the San Antonio Spurs, if he's open for the Rockets, for some of these other situations, I just think that there's teams that could have better offers. And there's also teams that, if the Nets want to get in, are just going to drive up the price to a point where it's not really even going to make sense for them to go after him. So if you're talking about that, it's really just going to be, it looks like shifting towards another tank next season, where it'll be more exciting, I think, because the Nets are going to have young players. They should have like at least 2, probably 3, maybe 4 even, first round picks, young guys to have on the team that they're looking to develop. And that's exciting in itself, because the Nets haven't had, they've never picked in the lottery since Sean Marks was the GM of this team. And he's done a very good job drafting with, assistant GM BJ Johnson, and the Nets scouting team there have done a really good job finding guys in the 20s, even into the second round, early second round. So having the 8th pick, they can still get a very good player. And, I'm going to have a lot more content coming up about who those guys could potentially be. Off the top of my head, I think like the top of the high end of the range that they could maybe get, probably not, is like Jeremiah Fears, Trey Johnson, Kaman Maluak. Those guys will probably be gone. And then beyond that, you're looking at guys like Con Knipple, Colin Murray Boyles, Noah Senge, Derek Queen, guys like that. So they could still get a very good player. But I think, it's obviously going to be a slower build, like that Cooper Flagg, that Giannis guy, those dreams of having that star, face of the franchise type guy. That's probably not coming to fruition. And, some Nets fans might be frustrated by that. Some Nets fans might be, relieved in that maybe they won't go the Giannis route, or this might make it less likely because some people didn't want them to trade everything in for them. But, this was also a reminder, as I said, this lottery, that luck heavily plays into this stuff. And the Nets can tank again next season. They can do that. There's no guarantee that they're going to get a top pick. But, this has been very doom and gloom. I think, it's tough because the Nets fell to 8. I think if you went into this season and you told Nets fans that they were going to have the 8th pick, I think a lot of people, unfairly or fairly, whatever your opinion is, would have said that that's a disaster. And that's how it shook out. And they are 8th. And, that's really tough for, a fan base that I think really had those hopes of getting a guy like Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper or Ace Bailey coming into the season. Like, that was the expectation. And it didn't come to fruition. The ping pong balls didn't bounce the Nets' way. The basketball gods, karma, whatever you want to talk. If you believe in that stuff, I mean, a lot of people, I think throw it around jokingly, but believe in it. This was not a good day for karma, for the basketball gods, for any of that, with with the Mavs getting the number 1 pick. The Spurs aren't as bad, but they've had all this luck already. Them moving to number 2 and the 76ers getting rewarded for just a disgusting tank job in the second half of the season for a team that was supposed to be in the title conversation this year. They get rewarded. And the Nets fall, who I think the Nets are one of the tanking teams that did put their best foot forward for most of the season. So not a great day for karma, for the basketball gods, whatever you want to call it from that perspective. So that's tough. But we'll see. The Nets are still going to have a lot of, they have a ton of draft stuff to go through. They have a ton of picks. It's really exciting from that perspective. As I said, this was a little doom and gloom, but they have 4 first-round picks. They have 5 within the top 36. They have over $50 million in cap space. They, have a treasure trove of assets. They're in a good position to set themselves up eventually to get that franchise type guy to be a contender, but there's just a lot less certainty about where that guy's going to come from because it's not Cooper Flagg. It's not Dylan Harper. They could get him at 8. I think, as I said, it's just less likely based on, the percentages of how this plays out. Usually the guys in the top 3 are the guys who turn into that type of play, those type of players. It's not going to be Giannis. So we'll see. Could it be a guy in the draft next year? Could it be, Darren Peterson, AJ Demansky, Cam Boozer? We'll see. But we're talking about another year potentially of, looking at development of young guys, which we didn't get to do as much last year, but then another year of looking at lottery odds, another year of all that conversation. I think that that's exhausting. And also, I just question, like the Nets they don't want to tank, obviously. Like it's no team wants to tank. But you look at the Nets, and you look at the way that they handled it this past year, like they committed to it at the very end of the season. But Jordi Fernandez is a super competitive guy. If you listen to anything that he's had to say to the media, anything that he has to say about, behind closed doors, he's very into building winning habits, setting a foundation, doing all of those things. And when you're a team that is losing a lot and it's in your incentive to lose, maybe even trying to lose at some point, it's very tough to do those things. I think it'll be easier next season because the Nets are going to have all these young guys that they can just play. And when you play young guys like that, you're going to lose a lot of games organically. But it still is difficult to be in a tanking situation like that for another year, especially coming off the heels of going from that big 3 and the way that this is all just trended. The Nets really haven't had a lot of luck. And maybe this was the final, like maybe they're really due in 2026 now and the ping pong balls will bounce their way that time. But I wrote an article right after this happened and I said Nets fans aren't going to be holding their breath because there just hasn't been a lot of good luck going the Nets way. And, there wasn't tonight. Now the Knicks are up 3-1 and it looks like have a real chance to go to the NBA finals, which is, if you just want to talk about luck in the NBA, look at the Knicks. I mean, not that they totally they played great. They put a team together that is a very good team. It's not even luck. I'm just saying, look at the situation that they were in at the end of the regular season. They were 0-13 against the top 3 teams in the league. A lot of their fans were extremely down on them as a team. They go in, I don't really think they looked good in that Pistons series. They get by the Pistons. Then they win 2 games against the Celtics where the Celtics just shot awful and blow 20-point leads. And now it looks like, Jason Tatum tears his Achilles and they're up 3-1 and they're going to potentially go to the championship. So the NBA is unpredictable in that way. We saw that with the lottery tonight. We saw that with how these playoffs are going. And, from the Nets perspective, I might be rambling a little bit. It's late. I'm a little tired, a little kooky. But there's just not a lot of certainty of, where that star type guy is going to come from. They'll have a lot of chances to do it. It just, is less clean than obviously the idea of getting Cooper Flagg or trading for Giannis or whatever. There's just, it kind of impacts the way that I think this rebuild's going to go, where it could be building out a little bit longer now, another tanking season, as opposed to making that pivot to being competitive right away, which I think a lot of fans are probably hoping for on some level. Obviously, the Nets front office and the coaching staff was probably hoping for, but it's not the way the cookie crumbled. And Nets, it didn't break the Nets' way, as it often doesn't. But that's all I have for tonight. I didn't really have any notes. I was just going off the dome, coming home off of the lottery results, seeing that end of that Knicks game, and just trying to go with the raw emotions and the feelings of what was happening. But I'll have more draft coverage in the coming days. I'm going to be at the draft combine and to talk to all these prospects. Now I kind of know some of the guys that are potentially going to be in the Nets range. So I'll get to do some interviews with those guys and get to know a little bit more about them, get to see them do some drills. And then we'll just be doing draft prep all the way up to that June 24th, 25th, whatever day it is at Barclays Center. So that'll be exciting. Nets do have the 8th pick. They can get a guy in the top 10 for the first time since 2010. And we'll see, what Sean Marks and those guys are able to do with these picks, but definitely a tough night overall for the Nets. But that does it for this episode of Believe in Nets on the Believe Podcast Network, your one-stop shop for everything happening in the sports and entertainment world. I'm your host, Eric Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. As I said at the top, if you guys don't already, go to my YouTube channel at Eric Slater NBA. Like this, commented on it if you enjoyed it. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. Subscribe to the channel. You guys can find all my work on ClutchPoints.com, news, analysis every single day. Follow me on Twitter at Eric Slater _. I'll have coverage of the combine and everything on those platforms. Also here on Believe in Nets, as well as, more draft coverage is coming up in the coming weeks. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. Hang in there, Nets world. I'll talk to you soon.